Episode 42, Missouri Ignites. Welcome to the Hidden and Distorted History of the Church series, where we will be looking at the historical aspects of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormons. In this series, I will try and inform those unaware of the true facts of Mormon history. Recap. Last week, we revealed Joseph Smith's endorsement of the Danites' aggressive tactics and examined how Smith entered into a second plural marriage with his first polyandrous wife, Lucinda Pendleton Morgan Harris. We also delved into the outbreak of the 1838 Missouri Mormon War and its impact on the community. This week, we delve into the arrival of a non-Mormon mob to DeWitt just before the Mormons were forcibly expelled. We examine Governor Lilburn W. Boggs' decisive order to mobilize 2,800 state troopers, ready to confront the escalating tensions. Additionally, we cover the preliminary hearing of Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon in Daviess County, a pivotal moment that set the stage for the conflict to come. Finally, we unravel the key events that shaped September and October of 1838. This is an episode you won't want to miss. Part 1. On August 20th, 1838, roughly 100 armed men stormed into the Mormon settlement of DeWitt, Missouri. These weren't just disgruntled locals. They were a mixture of residents and militia members who had finally reached their breaking point. They demanded that the Mormons leave, accusing them of political and economic disruption. What had started as a clash of ideologies was now spiraling into a full-blown conflict. To understand how it came to this, we must first revisit the Gallatin Election Day brawl on August 6, 1838. William Penniston, a political candidate and staunch anti-Mormon, successfully rallied local non-Mormons to block the Saints from voting. What followed was an all-out melee that saw fists flying and tensions erupting. No one was killed, but the fight planted the seeds of violence. Saints' unscripted claims: the Saints were heavily outnumbered and eventually withdrew. Nobody was killed, but both sides definitely got roughed up. This was the spark that ignited the conflict known as the Missouri Mormon War. But let's not gloss over what happened next. Rumors of Mormon deaths reached Joseph Smith, prompting him to personally investigate. When he discovered the rumors were false, Smith didn't de-escalate. Instead, he joined Samson of Ard and a group of Danites, a secret Mormon paramilitary group, to intimidate Adam Black, a local justice of the peace. Yes, you heard that right. Joseph Smith, the so-called prophet of peace, and his band of Danites threatened an elected official. Saints Unscripted has the audacity to describe this blatant act of intimidation as a perfectly good thing to do. Mind-blowing, right? By the time the Mormons settled in DeWitt earlier in 1838, their reputation preceded them. Far from the peaceful settlers they claimed to be, the Saints brought with them a vision of theocracy, a society ruled by Joseph Smith and his inner circle. Local residents weren't buying it. Animosity quickly turned into outright hostility, especially as Mormon expansion disrupted local politics and commerce. When the armed mob arrived in DeWitt, it wasn't without cause. The Mormons had a track record of overstepping boundaries and asserting dominance wherever they settled. Though violence didn't erupt that day, the armed standoff marked the beginning of a siege that would last for weeks. The LDS Church spins these events as unprovoked persecution, but their own records betray them. They admit armed fighting lasted 2 weeks. In mid-October, Latter-day Saints raided and burned homes and stores in Gallatin and Millport. At Crooked River, Saints and Missouri militiamen skirmished, resulting in the deaths of 1 Missourian and 2 church members, including Apostle David W. Patton. And what of Sidney Rigdon's inflammatory speeches in July? The church would have you believe they were calls for self-defense. In reality, they were declarations of war, filled with rhetoric that escalated tensions and emboldened the Danites to act as vigilantes. The church conveniently omits the Danites' reign of terror, the raids, and the intimidation campaigns that provoked the very violence they claim to have suffered. The Mormons were not innocent victims in this conflict, no matter how much the church tries to rewrite history. Their actions, from burning towns to threatening officials, played a direct role in the violence that followed. The Missouri Mormon War wasn't persecution. It was a battle between 2 groups equally mired in blame and bloodshed. Part 2, Boggs 2,800 strong. On August 30th, 1838, Governor Lilburn W. Boggs ordered 2,800 state troops to prepare for deployment in western Missouri, a decision that would escalate an already volatile situation into open conflict. This wasn't a reaction born solely out of paranoia or prejudice against the Mormons. It was a direct response to increasingly brazen acts of defiance, violence, and disregard for the law by Mormon settlers. From their aggressive consolidation of power in Caldwell County to their involvement in violent skirmishes like the Gallatin election brawl earlier that month, the Mormons weren't merely innocent victims. They were actively fanning the flames of hostility. By August, the Mormon leadership, under Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon, had adopted a combative stance. Rigdon's infamous Salt Sermon in July had set the tone, calling for the expulsion of dissenters and issuing veiled threats to their enemies. It wasn't just rhetoric. The Mormon Daviess, a secretive paramilitary group, had already been involved in acts of intimidation and violence against perceived threats. Their actions sent shockwaves through surrounding communities, where non-Mormons feared for their safety and property. Reports of Mormon settlers raiding non-Mormon farms and businesses spread rapidly, further fueling tensions. Governor Boggs, a figure with his own anti-Mormon leanings, acted under mounting pressure from local officials and non-Mormon settlers. These groups weren't just paranoid, they had legitimate concerns. By late August, accounts of Mormon militias mobilizing, seizing control of local government, and openly threatening non-Mormons had reached a breaking point. Some settlers even reported losing their land and livestock to Mormon raids. Adding to the hysteria were exaggerated rumors of alliances between Mormons and Native American tribes. Unfounded claims, but ones that carried enough weight to push Boggs into action. For the Mormons, the governor's decision was yet another blow in what they saw as an ongoing campaign of persecution. However, their own actions made it difficult for outsiders to sympathize. Joseph Smith and his followers had openly defied local laws, ignored property claims, and declared their loyalty was to their own leadership above Missouri's government. To Boggs, this was insurrection, an existential threat to the stability of the state that demanded an immediate and overwhelming response. The mobilization of 2,800 troops only escalated the situation further. Non-Mormons saw the deployment as reassurance that the state would back their efforts to contain what they perceived as a Mormon uprising. For the Mormons, it was a declaration of war. Both sides braced for conflict, and it was clear that violence was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. Governor Boggs' order wasn't about restoring peace. It was about crushing what he saw as rebellion. But it's impossible to ignore the role the Mormons themselves played in escalating tensions. Far from innocent victims, their aggressive actions and refusal to compromise were just as responsible for the chaos that engulfed Missouri. The stage was set for bloodshed, and neither side came away blameless. Part 3. Joseph Smith called to court yet again. On September 7, 1838, Joseph Smith and Lyman White appeared before Judge Austin A. King in Daviess County for a preliminary hearing. The charges stemmed from their involvement in escalating conflicts between Mormons and non-Mormons, including the notorious Gallatin Election Day brawl a month earlier. These proceedings were pivotal, as the growing unrest in Daviess County had pushed Missouri's legal and political systems to take action against the Mormon leadership. At the hearing, Judge King heard testimonies that painted Smith and White as instigators of disorder in the region. They were accused of using the Daviess to intimidate local non-Mormons and enforce their will. King ultimately ordered both men to post bail and attend a subsequent grand jury hearing in Daviess County to answer the charges formally. But Smith and White had no intention of complying. Lyman White, in particular, took an aggressive stance, leveraging the Daviess to protect himself from arrest. White and the Daviess openly resisted legal authority, refusing to acknowledge the court's legitimacy and making it clear they would not submit to the jurisdiction of a system they believed was hostile to their cause. Joseph Smith, for his part, similarly defied the court order. Instead of using the legal system to address the charges, he joined White in rejecting the proceedings altogether. Their actions sent a clear message. They would not be bound by the same laws as their non-Mormon neighbors. This blatant defiance, coupled with the Daviess' growing reputation for violence and intimidation, significantly escalated tensions in the region. The refusal of Smith and White to appear in court was more than a simple act of resistance. It was a calculated decision that inflamed hostilities. Their use of the Danites to shield themselves not only challenged local authority, but also fueled rumors among non-Mormons that the Mormon leadership was building a theocratic state, enforced by armed militias. This perception played directly into the hands of anti-Mormon factions, who used the defiance as evidence that the Mormons were a lawless and dangerous group. By the time the grand jury convened later in 1838, Smith and White's failure to appear had further polarized the situation. The Mormons were seen as aggressors, using force to sidestep legal accountability, while non-Mormon Missourians increasingly viewed the state government's response as inadequate. Part 4. Violence flares up all over Missouri. The excitement and chaos in northern Missouri showed no signs of slowing down in early September 1838. On September 9th, tensions escalated further when a group of armed Mormons intercepted and captured 3 men attempting to transport firearms to vigilantes in Daviess County. These men were allegedly aiding the non-Mormon settlers who had banded together to oppose the growing influence of the Mormon community. The Mormons justified their actions as a necessary step to protect themselves from aggression, but to their opponents, this move only underscored their image as an increasingly militant and lawless faction. This wasn't just a case of vigilante groups clashing in the shadows. Both sides petitioned Judge Austin A. King, demanding action to restore order. The Mormons claimed they were under siege, targeted by hostile neighbors determined to drive them out. The non-Mormons, on the other hand, accused the Mormons of instigating violence and enforcing their will through intimidation and armed force. Faced with this combustible situation, Judge King acted swiftly. He ordered General David R. Atchison to mobilize 400 troops to intervene and disperse both the Mormon and non-Mormon factions. But King's decision, rather than calming the storm, reflected the deep divisions within the region. For the Mormons, the mobilization of state troops was another sign of systemic bias and persecution. For the Missourians, it was reassurance that the state government might finally take control of a conflict spiraling out of hand. What is often glossed over by Mormon apologists is how these events fit into the broader narrative of Mormon aggression in the region. The interception of arms and the subsequent petitions to Judge King weren't just desperate acts of self-defense. They were part of a larger pattern of escalating conflict, where both sides contributed to the growing chaos. Once again, Joseph Smith's leadership and the actions of his followers, including the secretive Danites, played a pivotal role in turning what could have been a tense but manageable situation into a full-blown regional crisis. This turning point showed that neither side was interested in de-escalation. Instead, they were gearing up for the next confrontation, with Judge King's order to raise troops serving as a harbinger of the violence to come. Part 5. A Month to Remember. In mid-September 1838, tensions in Missouri continued to boil over as vigilante groups, Mormon settlers, and state authorities became entangled in an escalating conflict. On September 13th, Carroll County vigilantes initially planned to assault the Mormon settlement in DeWitt. However, they postponed their attack and redirected their efforts to Daviess County, rallying to assist non-Mormon settlers against what they perceived as Mormon aggression. This decision marked a significant shift in focus, amplifying the unrest in Daviess and further entrenching hostilities between the two factions. By September 18th, the turmoil had grown so severe that Governor Lilburn W. Boggs ordered 2,000 state troops to assemble, preparing to personally lead a march to western Missouri. Reports of violent disturbances compelled Boggs to act, though his leadership would later prove inconsistent in addressing the conflict. General David Atchison, tasked with dispersing the vigilantes, succeeded in temporarily restoring order in Daviess County on September 20th, leaving 100 troops under General John B. Clark to maintain peace. Convinced the immediate threat had subsided, Boggs dismissed the troops and returned to Jefferson City on September 24th, a decision that would soon prove premature. The fragile peace shattered on October 1st, when vigilantes launched an assault on DeWitt, setting fire to the home and stables of Mormon settler Smith Humphrey. For days, the Mormon settlers pleaded with Governor Boggs and other civil authorities for protection, but their calls went unanswered. When General Parks arrived in DeWitt with 100 troops on October 6th, the anti-Mormon sentiments within his own ranks undermined his authority. Unable to quell the unrest, Parks retreated to Ray County, leaving the Mormon community at the mercy of their attackers. On October 9th, a messenger informed the Mormons that Governor Boggs had washed his hands of the matter, stating they must rely on local authorities for protection, a damning decision that signaled the state's indifference to their plight. By October 11th, the beleaguered Mormons in DeWitt surrendered, abandoning the settlement and relocating to Caldwell and Daviess counties. Yet their departure did not placate their enemies. The Carroll County vigilantes resolved to join efforts to expel the Mormons from Daviess, escalating the crisis further. Meanwhile, Mormon leaders Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon, aware of the growing threat, took aggressive steps to fortify their position. On October 14th and 15th, they issued a rallying cry for Mormon troops to ride to Diamond, and defend the saints. Smith and Rigdon went so far as to threaten those who refused to join the Mormon militia. In response, 400 armed Mormon soldiers marched into Daviess County, setting the stage for an imminent and bloody confrontation. Both sides were far from blameless in these events. The vigilantes acted as lawless aggressors, but the Mormons' militarized response, fueled by Smith and Rigdon's rhetoric and the actions of the secretive Danites, only served to inflame the situation. This was no longer a matter of peaceful settlers seeking refuge. It was open conflict, with both parties engaging in provocations that pushed Missouri closer to all-out war. Let me know what you think about the events that transpired in the comments section below. Please watch for future videos, and thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for the day.